For many centuries, the majestic pyramids of Egypt loomed over the desert, concealing the secrets of a once thriving civilization. That silence was finally broken in July 1799. When a French soldier found a large inscribed stone near the city of Rosetta, around 55 kilometers from Alexandria. This artifact, now called the Rosetta Stone, was etched with multiple scripts, including hieroglyphs, and its decipherment revived a language lost for millennia, opening the door to the wonders of ancient Egypt. Egypt is often described as the gift of the Nile, a phrase attributed to the Greek historian Herodotus. Each year, the river's floodwaters spread fertile silt across the valley before receding, creating ideal conditions for one of humanity's earliest agricultural societies. Over millions of years, the Nile carved out its course during the Miocene period, shaping the land into the form recognized today. By the end of the Paleolithic era, people in this region created arrows and harpoons, crafted tools from bone, and worked animal skins. They also produced pottery, as shown by archaeological finds near the Fayum region. Carbon dating of these sites, which date from 4640 to 4250 BCE, confirms that grains were harvested and stored in simple shelters built of reeds plastered with mud. These early dwellings formed the basis for permanent settlements along the river. Egypt was traditionally divided into two territories. Lower Egypt lay in the north, where the Nile split into branches that formed the delta, while Upper Egypt stretched southward to Aswan. Around 3000 BCE, King Narmer united these lands under a single rule. Though they were joined, each region preserved its own royal crown, the white hedjet for Upper Egypt and the red deshret for Lower Egypt. Pharaohs, hailed as rulers of both lands, wore the shent, a double crown that symbolized their reign over a unified Egypt. The pre-dynastic era of Egypt spans from about 6000 to 3150 BCE, stretching from Paleolithic times through the Neolithic Age up to the start of the First Dynasty. While there are no surviving texts from this period, artifacts unearthed along the Nile Valley shine a light on the cultures that took root there. Researchers have traditionally named these cultures after the sites where their relics were discovered, rather than by the names these societies might have used for themselves. Between Egypt and Nubia, a culture known as the Halfan flourished around 30,000 BCE, later giving rise to groups such as the Kardan, Sibyllian, and Harifian around 10,000 BCE. These were primarily hunter-gatherers who gradually began living in fixed settlements once agriculture became more common. One of the earliest farming cultures was based in the Fayum Oasis, a natural basin situated southeast of the Giza Plateau, where the Fayum A people lived from about 9000 to 6000 BCE. They built reed dwellings, often with underground storage for grains, and supplemented their farming activities with hunting and fishing. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats, and produced baskets and pottery. Over time, tribal chiefs emerged as leaders, and their authority may have been passed down within families. As communities expanded, people moved from small nomadic groups to larger, more stable settlements throughout the Nile Delta. One of these cultures, Merimde Beni Salama, thrived between roughly 8000 and 4000 BCE on the western side of the delta, where evidence of early Neolithic grain storage has been found. People grew wheat, barley, lentils, peas, and flax, and domesticated animals to support their way of life. The annual Nile floods deposited silt and mud on the valley floors, creating the fertile conditions that made Egyptian agriculture possible. Early Egyptians carved out basins to store floodwaters, acting as a rudimentary irrigation system for crops. Over time, new cultures arose, each building upon the achievements of the past. Around 4000 BCE, the El Omari culture constructed circular houses using mud plaster, a significant step beyond earlier reed huts. In Lower Egypt, which includes the northern delta region near the Mediterranean Sea, various groups evolved and flourished. Meanwhile, in Upper Egypt to the south, the Badarian culture began as a partially nomadic society, living in tents, but gradually favouring settled homes. They were followed by the Amratian culture, also known as Naqada I, known for more advanced house designs that included windows, hearths, and walls made from a mix of wattle and mud. Windbreaks were built around doorways to protect against desert gusts. Around 3500 BCE, mummification became more common, and the deceased were often buried with personal objects. The Gizaean culture, also called Naqada II, expanded trade networks, sparking notable changes in art and architecture. Many of their buildings, including wealthier homes, featured sun-dried brick and enclosed courtyards. Over time, Abydos, located north of Naqada, became an important burial site and evolved into a vast necropolis. Burials there began with modest mud brick tombs, later replaced by larger, carefully hewn stone structures. Kings would eventually choose Abydos for their own grand tombs, but artifacts show that people from every corner of the land also brought their departed here for burial. By this point, the cities of Zois in the delta and Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt had already developed into significant centres, while Thinis and Naqada also prospered. During the period from 3400 to 3200 BCE, early forms of hieroglyphic writing emerged. Archaeologists have found symbols on pottery and ivory near Abydos, though complete written sentences only appear around 5 centuries later. Under the Second Dynasty king Peribsen, as trade increased and populations grew, smaller brick-built villages developed into larger urban areas, sometimes competing for resources and trade routes. 3 dominant city-states emerged in Upper Egypt: Thinis, Naqada, and Hierakonpolis, which vied for power. Battles took place between shadowy rulers referred to as the Scorpion Kings, and later figures known as Ka and Narmer. Some scholars propose that Scorpion I, Scorpion II, and Ka were the final leaders of the Predynastic era, just before King Narmer brought both Lower and Upper Egypt under his domain, forging the First Dynasty and marking the official beginning of recorded Egyptian history. The early dynastic period of Egypt began around 3150 to 2613 BCE, marking the start of the nation's documented history. During this era, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north were brought together under a single authority, and the monarchy assumed divine status. A distinctive Egyptian culture also took shape, including developments in writing, arts, and sciences. Menes, often identified with Narmer, was a ruler from Upper Egypt. He is believed to have come from Thinis or Hierakonpolis, subduing nearby city-states before conquering Lower Egypt around 3150 BCE. He strengthened ties between regions by marrying Princess Nithotep of Naqada, and he waged campaigns in Lower Egypt to quell revolts and expand into Canaan and Nubia. Under his reign, large construction efforts were launched, and urban centers grew rapidly. Menes was succeeded around 3100 BCE by Horahar, who continued his father's military activities and took a keen interest in religious traditions. During Horahar's time, the first mastaba tomb was built, reflecting new ideas about the afterlife. Horahar's successor, Jer, ruled from about 3050 BCE, followed by Jet around 3000 BCE. Jet wed Princess Mernith, who may have governed in her own right, marking the earliest known instance of a woman exercising royal power. Den came to the throne around 2990 BCE and is regarded as the most accomplished monarch of the First Dynasty. He ruled for 50 years, overseeing economic expansion, waging successful military campaigns, and commissioning grand building projects and artworks. Den was also the first king shown wearing both the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, demonstrating unity. Two subsequent kings, Anajib and Semerkhet, faced frequent uprisings and struggled to maintain control. The dynasty ended with Kwa-Ah, whose death triggered a succession crisis. Hotep-Seqenenre emerged victorious, founding the Second Dynasty around 2890 BCE. The Second Dynasty was marked by scarce records and repeated internal conflicts. Hotep-Seqenenre, meaning the two powers are at peace, is credited with unifying warring princes, although his reign was still beset by turmoil. Raneb, also called Nibra, linked his name to the gods, emphasizing the sacred role of the king. Another ruler, Peribsen, chose to align himself with the god Set rather than Horus, possibly for political reasons in Upper Egypt. Despite early theories that he promoted a single deity, artifacts from his reign show that many gods were still worshipped, and the kingdom thrived in trade, religion, and artistic ventures. Peribsen was succeeded by Khâsekhemoui, who continued building projects, reinforced unification, and fathered the future Pharaoh Djoser. By the close of this period, Egypt's monarchy and cultural foundations were firmly established, setting the stage for the achievements of the eras to come. Egypt's third dynasty begins with King Djoser, famed for his step pyramid at Saqqara. Manetho's records are unclear about Sanacht, leaving questions about his exact reign and even the form of his name. In fact, references to Sanacht appear only on the Abydos king list, the Turin Papyrus, and two reliefs found in Mastaba Tomb K2 at a site called Beit Khalaf. Djoser ruled for at least 20 years, as suggested by the many monuments he commissioned. He led military expeditions in the Sinai region and preserved national unity, creating a stable environment for architectural and artistic progress. His step pyramid at Saqqara, near Memphis, is viewed as the oldest pyramid in Egypt. This monument was designed by Imhotep, the king's architect, vizier, astrologer, chief minister and sage, later deified as a god of medicine in Egypt and Greece. A statue unearthed at the pyramid site bears Imhotep's name and titles, including leader of the sculptors and chief of the seers. Records from the Old Kingdom show that the chief magician often held the position of the kingdom's main physician, originally intended as a basic mastaba with a flat top and sloping sides. The step pyramid was transformed by Imhotep's grand plan. He stacked several mastabas of diminishing size on top of one another, creating a six-tier structure. Instead of the usual clay bricks, the builders used large stone slabs decorated with designs evoking reeds and other plants. Upon completion, the pyramid stood approximately 62 meters tall, making it the most impressive construction of its era. To guard the king's remains and goods, Its burial chambers were dug below the pyramid, in a labyrinth of corridors and storage rooms. Nevertheless, ancient thieves robbed the tomb, leaving only Djoser's foot behind. Despite that loss, the step pyramid's design showcased the pioneering skill of 3rd dynasty builders. They also erected other remarkable monuments, sometimes called the Buried Pyramid and the Layer Pyramid, setting the stage for the smooth-sided pyramids of the 4th dynasty that continue to fascinate the world today. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, also called the Age of the Pyramids, or the Age of the Pyramid Builders, spanned from the 3rd through the 6th dynasties, and reached its height in the 4th. It was during this era that King Sneferu mastered the art of pyramid construction, and the magnificent pyramids at Giza were built under Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Surviving texts and inscriptions from that time are limited, so historians rely heavily on stone monuments, statues and inscriptions found within or near temples and burial complexes to reconstruct events and dates. The tomb of the 5th dynasty king Unas, for instance, contains the earliest known pyramid texts, which reveal the religious beliefs of that period. Under the Old Kingdom, a powerful central government emerged in Memphis, led by a monarch whose reign was perceived as divinely ordained. Art, writing, and construction techniques advanced, giving us the grandest legacy of ancient Egypt, the massive pyramids and the Great Sphinx at Giza. Yet only a fraction of Old Kingdom artworks and inscriptions survive. Many of the sculptures and reliefs from that time appear uniform in style, reflecting the tastes of the capital's elite. Large or small, these monuments were built with remarkable precision, and Egyptians of later eras continued to regard them with reverence. Egyptians of every class shared a common religious framework. Though differences in wealth and rank persisted into the afterlife, those of the highest status could afford elaborately prepared tombs, while others could not. The only serious barrier to receiving a proper burial was dying abroad, since Egyptians believed one had to be buried in home soil to be resurrected for eternal life. Returning a body to Egypt was therefore of utmost importance, so it could be interred with the correct rites. Organising the colossal workforce required to build the pyramids demanded an efficient bureaucracy. At the top of that hierarchy stood the king, considered the owner of all land by divine mandate. Below him, a small class of literate officials directed governance, military affairs, taxation, and large projects. The vizier, akin to a prime minister, coordinated the day-to-day administration, controlling communication through scribes, and distributing tasks to governors and military leaders. One of the earliest monuments often attributed to the Old Kingdom is the pyramid at Meidum, long credited to Huni, the last king of the 3rd dynasty. However, evidence suggests it was actually Sneferu, the first ruler of the 4th dynasty, who took over and possibly completed that pyramid, later called the False Pyramid because of its collapsed outer casing. Sneferu then built 2 more pyramids at Dashur. The first, known as the Bent Pyramid, begins at a steep angle and then abruptly changes to a gentler slope, creating its distinct bent profile. This design likely arose when builders realized the original angle was unstable. Instead of abandoning the project, Sneferu continued until completion. Learning from that lesson, he built the Red Pyramid at a stable 43-degree inclination, using reddish limestone and achieving the first fully successful true pyramid in Egypt. These efforts launched a golden age of architecture and engineering. Sneferu's achievements and stable reign prepared the way for his son Khufu, whom the Greeks later referred to as Cheops. Khufu is best remembered for the Great Pyramid at Giza, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. Greek and later sources often painted Khufu as a harsh ruler who forced his people into labour, Yet archaeological evidence suggests that the labourers received payment in the form of rations and did not consist of slaves. They likely came from farming communities during the Nile's annual flood, when fields were unworkable. While some stories portray Khufu as cruel, such as the tale in the Westcar Papyrus describing a magician's display of power, these accounts may have been attempts to highlight the king's fascination with sorcery rather than proof of cruelty. During Khufu's reign, the kingdom gained wealth through military ventures in Nubia and Libya, and through trade with cities like Byblos. Khufu also financed irrigation works, including a dam at Wadi Garawi, to improve farmland and urban life. The Great Pyramid was constructed over 2 decades, with skilled architects, engineers, and large crews of labourers overseen by Khufu's vizier, Hemiunu, who was also a relative. Its internal passages, alignment to the cardinal points, and massive stone blocks still spark debate among historians. No ancient text fully explains the methods used to raise such a monumental structure. After Khufu's death, a temporary shift in the line of succession brought Djedefre to power. He was Khufu's son, but perhaps not his intended heir. The question of who built the Great Sphinx, Djedefre or his successor and brother Khafre, remains unsettled. The majority of scholars identify Khafre as its builder, partly because the Sphinx lies in direct alignment with Khafre's pyramid complex and seems to bear his facial features. Though some continue to argue it might represent Khufu, Khafre ruled much as his father did, consolidating power among immediate family. The pyramid he built at Giza is the second largest. While details of his reign are sparse, his achievements likely mirrored Khufu's in military and economic affairs. After Khafre, there was another brief dispute over the throne involving his nephew Bakar, who did not rule long, and Khafre's son Menkaure then took charge. Later Greek and Egyptian sources generally portray Menkaure positively, praising his sense of justice and benevolence. Menkaur's pyramid and mortuary complex at Giza are notably smaller than the first two. The reduced scale reflects a key factor in the Old Kingdom's eventual decline: diminishing resources. Building materials and labour became more difficult to marshal at the same scale as before. Even so, Menkaure aimed to match the grandeur of his predecessors. The early death of his designated successor, Seqenenre, caused disruptions before Menkaure himself died. His heir, Shepseskaf, completed Menkaure's complex, but chose to be buried in a mastaba at Saqqara, rather than build a grand pyramid for himself. Throughout the 4th dynasty and into the 5th and 6th, priests oversaw the temples and shrines that surrounded these pyramid sites, functioning almost like small cities for the living as well as the dead. Giza, for example, was once a vibrant community of priests, labourers, artisans, brewers and merchants who supported daily rituals, produced goods, and maintained these vast monuments. Peasants, who formed the lowest rung of society, worked the fields along the Nile, then took up state-sponsored building projects during the flood season when farming was impossible. In return, they received food, beer, and sometimes payment. There is no solid evidence that enslaved persons constructed the pyramids. On the contrary, these workers appear to have been Egyptians performing state labour in exchange for sustenance and the chance of upward mobility. Within this society, skilled artisans commanded higher pay than unskilled labourers, and certain trades rose in prominence. Carpenters who fashioned tables, chests, and chairs could become wealthy. Potters produced plates, bowls, and jars for storage and trade. Brewers held a special status, as beer was a staple of the Egyptian diet and was considered a divine gift. Women often ran breweries, at least in the early periods, and beer was so essential that labourers at Giza received regular daily rations. Family life varied by class. Most marriages were arranged, with girls around age 12 and boys around 15. Royal children might be promised at birth to foreign monarchs to cement alliances. Leisure activities also occupied part of daily life. Egyptians enjoyed sports such as handball, archery, tug-of-war, rowing, wrestling, and a type of water jousting on small boats in the Nile. Board games and lavish festivals enlivened the year, and Egyptian diets were based on grains and vegetables. Meat was a rarity, usually reserved for the wealthy. The 4th dynasty ended with Shepseskaf. The 5th dynasty, called the Dynasty of the Sun Kings, introduced a shift in focus toward the sun god Ra. Many rulers began incorporating Ra's name into their own. The first three, Userkaf, Sahur, and Neferkare-Kakai, were later remembered in the Westcar papyrus as having a divine birth. A woman named Kentkaus, possibly Menkaura's daughter, also emerges in records titled Mother of Two Kings of Upper and Lower Egypt, but her exact role remains unclear. She left behind a smaller pyramid at Giza. Userkaf built a grand sun temple at Abu Simbel, a sign that the king's stature was changing. Instead of focusing on the king's own pyramid, the people were directed to worship Ra more directly through priesthoods. Userkaf's son, Sahura, continued this trend by constructing his funerary complex near the Sun Temple. He also orchestrated the first recorded naval voyage to Punt and set up profitable trade pacts that enriched the kingdom. His temple design employed columns shaped like palm stems, a style later adopted throughout Egypt. Sahur's effective rule fostered a thriving economy, as seen in the fine craftsmanship of his complex. Neferkare-Kakai, Sahur's son, assumed the throne next. Few details survive about his reign, though records indicate the priesthood continued to expand its power. He was briefly followed by Neferifre, who died young, and then Shepseskare. A later king, Niusera Ini, built more temples and extended the authority of the clergy. Menkaure-Kayu succeeded him, the last ruler known to erect a sun temple, and then Djedkare-Isesi took the throne in the late 25th to mid-24th century BCE. He reformed the administration and greatly limited the power of temple priests, declining to build a dedicated sun temple and reducing the vast temple bureaucracies. The final king of the 5th dynasty was Unas, or Wenis, whose reign is poorly documented but significant for his introduction of the pyramid texts inside his tomb. By the start of the 6th dynasty, the authority of the royal court had weakened further. Teti, the first king of this new line, was assassinated by his personal guards according to some sources, an event unimaginable earlier when royal power was supreme. His successor, Userkare, had a short reign before Pepi I took charge. The power of local governors, called nomarchs, rose dramatically during these reigns, while the king's central authority waned. Pepi I was followed by Merenre Nemtiemsaf I, and then Pepi II, who ascended the throne as a child and supposedly ruled into extreme old age, possibly close to 100 years. During that lengthy reign, the Old Kingdom slipped into chaos. Decentralization accelerated as provincial authorities and temple bureaucrats took control. Resources grew ever harder to coordinate, and the royal government lacked the will or strength to unify the kingdom. After Pepi II, rulers such as Merenre Nemtiemsaf II and Neferkare, possibly the same figure the Greek historian Herodotus called Queen Nitocris, were too weak or short-lived to reverse the decline. Drought and subsequent famine exposed the fragile nature of the kingdom's administration. No strong monarch rose to address the crisis, and the 6th dynasty ultimately ended without effective leadership. The local nomarchs focused on their own regions rather than the welfare of all Egypt. As the central government collapsed, the Old Kingdom drew to a close, ushering in the first intermediate period. Though later rulers would restore unity, the grand age of pyramid building had come to an end. leaving behind monuments that would captivate and inspire humankind for thousands of years. Egypt's first intermediate period, roughly spanning the 7th to early 11th dynasties, arose as the centralized government in Memphis grew weak, while provincial leaders, nomarchs, claimed greater authority in their respective regions. The imposing pyramids and massive building projects of the Old Kingdom no longer appeared. Without a strong central monarch to marshal resources and organize labor, large-scale state-funded construction became impossible. Yet contrary to some older scholarship, this phase was not a chaotic, dark age, but rather an era of shifting political models, independent city-states, and changing alliances. The poorly documented 7th and 8th dynasties were likely composed of minor kings, whose names, reigns, and deeds have largely vanished. Soon after, a line of rulers based in Herakleopolis, the 9th and 10th dynasties, claimed the title of legitimate kings. At the same time, Thebes in Upper Egypt saw the rise of the Intef family, influential nomarchs who resisted Herakleopolitan rule. Intef I, around 2125 BCE, styled himself Great Overlord of the Nome and Overseer of Priests, carving out a power base that set the stage for Theban ascendancy. Intef, the first's successors, continued to expand Theban influence. Mentuhotep I, circa 2115 BCE, conquered nearby nomes and built upon earlier victories. By the reign of Mentuhotep II, often called the Second Menes in later traditions, Thebes had solidified control over a large swath of territory. Mentuhotep II eventually defeated Herakleopolis, unifying the land under his leadership and punishing those nomes that had supported the northern kings, while rewarding Theban loyalists. Once the country was unified, Mentuhotep II devoted himself to consolidating power, sponsoring building initiatives, and leading military campaigns. After his death, Mentuhotep III, 2010 to 1998 BCE, advanced many of these policies and sent expeditions to the fabled land of Punt, enhancing Egypt's economy and reach. His successor, Mentuhotep IV, reigned about 7 years and may have carried on effective governance, since the country appears stable when Amenhotep eventually came to power. An inscription notes that while still vizier, Amenhotep oversaw quarrying for Mentuhotep IV's sarcophagus. 2 miracles allegedly occurred. A gazelle gave birth atop the chosen block of stone, and an unexpected rain revealed a water source. These omens, interpreted as divine favour, helped elevate Amenhotep to the throne. Amenhotep I left Thebes for unknown reasons and built a new capital at Ichtawi, near Memphis. His successor, Senusret I, 1971 to 1926 BCE, sponsored ambitious building projects, including an early temple to Amun at Karnak. Both kings curbed the power of nomarchs and priests, but permitted local prosperity. Their robust administration coordinated irrigation systems, tax collection, and labour in ways reminiscent of the Old Kingdom, yet without allowing provincial elites to overshadow the crown. Over time, they erected nilometers to measure annual floods, dug canals, and instituted policies that boosted agriculture. Senusret II, 1897 to 1878 BCE, continued this vision, transforming the Fayum region into a rich agricultural hub by constructing irrigation dikes and canals from Lake Meris. He was also responsible for the White Chapel, whose inscriptions detail the nomes of the era, providing a valuable historical record. Co-regency, in which an heir ruled alongside the sitting king, likely began under Amenhotep II and Senusret II, ensuring a smooth transition of power. Senusret III, 1878 to 1860 BCE, became the most renowned warrior king of the Middle Kingdom, deified even before his death. His military campaigns extended into Nubia, fortifying border regions and promoting trade. He also embarked on an expedition into Palestine, further enriching Egypt through commerce. Monuments and inscriptions depict him as a vigorous, decisive monarch, embodying Egyptian ideals of martial prowess. Amenhotep III, who followed Senusret III, focused on large-scale irrigation and construction rather than major warfare. He built the massive mortuary complex at Hawara, later called the Labyrinth by Greek visitors. Papyrus texts and tomb illustrations from this period show the detailed agricultural cycles, from field preparation after the flood to the planting of grains, fruits, and vegetables. Devices like the shaduf, a weighted lever for lifting water, helped irrigate smaller fields and gardens, reflecting a sophisticated grasp of hydraulic engineering. During Amenhotep IV's reign, 1815 to 1807 BCE, Egypt remained prosperous, with repeated trade and military ventures, especially across the Levant. However, his death left no direct male heir. Power then passed to Sobekneferu, 1807 to 1802 BCE, possibly Amenhotep IV's sister or wife, making her one of the earliest historically confirmed female rulers. When she too died childless, the line ended, ushering in a new dynasty. Thus ended the 12th dynasty, famed for its strong kings and far-reaching achievements. The 13th dynasty nominally preserved Middle Kingdom policies, yet lacked the same personal authority. Although the country stayed unified for a time, central authority slowly weakened, especially in Lower Egypt. Before long, foreign populations arrived, economic conditions changed, and the stage was set for another shift in Egypt's political landscape. This transition would lead into the Second Intermediate Period, with new powers contending for control in the Nile Valley. Egypt's Second Intermediate Period began as the power of the 13th dynasty waned, and the royal court shifted from Ichtawi to Thebes in Upper Egypt, reducing the ruler's influence in the north. This move left the Delta region increasingly vulnerable. Early in the 12th dynasty, King Amenhotep I had founded the settlement of Hutwaret in the far north, known later as Avaris. This town developed into a thriving commercial hub with access to the sea and to overland routes leading into Sinai and farther east. Over time, robust trade and immigration brought an influx of Semitic peoples to Avaris, and they grew wealthy and influential enough to assume control of local administration. The Egyptians referred to them as Heka Kasewet or Hyksos, but the precise origins of these new arrivals remain unclear. Older theories that attributed their presence to massive invasions or migrations from as far away as Aryan territories have been discredited, although the Egyptians labelled any foreigners east of their border as Asiatics, a broad term covering regions from the Levant to Mesopotamia. During the late 13th dynasty, Egyptian rulers lost focus on both the northern and southern frontiers. They had initially built fortifications in Nubia, but once supplies and reinforcements stopped arriving, the soldiers stationed there settled permanently. Over time, the Kingdom of Kush, based at Kerma, rose in strength and eventually destroyed or overtook some of Egypt's border forts. In the north, the Hyksos steadily expanded their power from Avaris, forging alliances with local governors in Lower Egypt and growing into a significant political force. They embraced aspects of Egyptian culture, adopting the local language, customs, and deities. Yet they also kept much of their own heritage. By this time, the Egyptian kings whose names appear on documents in the mid to late 13th and 16th dynasties are often non-Egyptian. The Hyksos line itself became the 15th dynasty, ruling parts of Lower Egypt from Avaris. They placed Egyptians in high offices and blended indigenous beliefs with their own. Their best-known leader, Apapi, also referred to as Apophis, took a name associated with the serpent enemy of the sun god Ra. Meanwhile, Nubia in the south continued to grow in power, leaving Thebes, once the heart of the 11th and 12th dynasties, squeezed between Hyksos territories in the north and Nubian lands in the south. According to a later tradition, Apepi sent a message to the Theban ruler, Seqenenre Tao, demanding that he suppress hippopotamus hunting near Thebes on the grounds that the animals disturbed his rest. The practice may have been integral to Theban ceremonies that the Hyksos considered offensive, since they venerated the god Set and included hippos in their rituals. Seqenenre Tao refused and marched north to challenge the Hyksos. His body, discovered centuries later, shows severe battle wounds, indicating he was likely killed in combat, and Thebes suffered a defeat. Tao's son Kamose inherited the conflict. Inscriptional evidence reveals that he lamented paying tribute to foreign rulers both north and south, and he initiated an attack on Avaris, claiming to have swept through the city with such force that he left its women barren and destroyed its structures. Yet the Hyksos apparently retained control of Lower Egypt for some time afterward, which suggests Kamose's victory was incomplete. After Kamose died, his brother Ahmose I rose to power. He renewed hostilities, ultimately driving the Hyksos out of Egypt, crushing Avaris, and pursuing them into the lands of the Levant. There he besieged them at Sharohen in southern Palestine for several years until they fled again, leaving no clear record of their fate. Ahmose I emerged triumphant, founding the 18th dynasty and ushering in the new kingdom, a phase of renewed prosperity and imperial expansion. To prevent future foreign takeovers, Ahmose I and his successors built a professional standing army, ready to pursue campaigns beyond Egypt's borders. The once divided country now stood at the threshold of an era marked by monumental architecture, increased trade, and formidable military strength. The experiences of the second intermediate period, namely foreign occupation and internal fragmentation, ultimately spurred the consolidation of power that defined the new kingdom, ensuring that Egypt never again fell as easily under outside domination. Ahmose I founded the New Kingdom, circa 1539 to 1077 BCE, by driving out the Hyksos and securing Egypt's borders more thoroughly than his predecessors of the Second Intermediate Period. He recognized that the Hyksos had gained control largely because earlier monarchs had allowed them to settle and then expand in the northern delta. Hence, from the very start of his reign, he fortified strategic towns, protected the vulnerable frontiers, and reorganized the military and administration. Once he had expelled the Hyksos from Avaris, he pursued them into Palestine and Syria, at the same time campaigning south against the Kingdom of Kush in Nubia. By the time he died, Egypt was stable, prosperous, and strongly unified, a situation that benefited his successor, Amenhotep I, 1541 to 1520 BCE. Amenhotep I emulated his father's martial ideals, though evidence suggests he mainly campaigned in Nubia. Whether he also conducted incursions into Palestine or Syria remains unclear, yet those regions stayed secure during his reign, hinting at either continued military vigilance or strong diplomatic ties. When Amenhotep I died, Thutmose I, 1520 to 1492 BCE, took the throne and further expanded Egypt's influence. Soon after becoming king, he crushed an uprising in Nubia by killing the Nubian leader himself, displaying the body on his ship as a warning to other rebels. He then moved south to extend Egyptian control more deeply into Kush, afterwards turning his attention to the Near East. Like others before him, he invested heavily in building projects, expanding the Temple of Karnak at Thebes and erecting other monuments across the land. Thutmose II, 1492 to 1479 BCE, his son and heir, remains a somewhat shadowy figure. His rule quickly gave way to the formidable presence of his half-sister and consort, Hatshepsut, 1479 to 1458 BCE. Although Thutmose II did father one son, Thutmose III, with a minor wife, Hatshepsut, was the child's aunt and stepmother, and upon Thutmose II's death, she became regent. In practice, she was the dominant partner in the co-regency. Hatshepsut's impact on Egypt was profound. She orchestrated successful trade missions, notably her celebrated voyage to the land of Punt, and she also oversaw extensive construction. She renovated and expanded the temple complex at Karnak, raised towering obelisks as tributes to the sun god, and erected her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, often praised for its elegance and architectural innovation. Despite Hatshepsut's effective rule, later pharaohs endeavoured to erase her from official records. Her name was chiselled off monuments, and her images were defaced. Part of the reason seems to have been an ideological return to a strict male kingship once Thutmose III, 1458 to 1425 BCE, assumed full authority. Upon Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III inherited a strong, prosperous kingdom and embarked on an ambitious series of 17 or more military campaigns over 20 years. He harnessed the war chariot, bronze weapons, and new tactical methods adopted from the Hyksos and refined by Egyptian ingenuity to extend Egypt's borders. Ruling from Thebes, he expanded his domain as far south as Buhen and well into the Near East, effectively laying the groundwork for an Egyptian empire. One of Thutmose III's most famous victories was at Megiddo. Sensing the potential weakness of a young king, the ruler of Kadesh fomented rebellion in Canaan, gathering a coalition of local forces. Thutmose III's rapid march north caught the rebels off guard, especially when he chose to lead his army through a narrow pass near Aruna. This bold maneuver placed his troops behind enemy lines, driving the rebels to panic and retreat into Megiddo. The Egyptians then laid siege until the city fell. A scribe and commander named Thanuni, often rendered as Chaneni, recorded the events in a narrative that so impressed Thutmose III he had it inscribed on temple walls at Karnak. Thutmose III continued subduing the Levantine states, including Syria and regions of Mitanni, ensuring Egypt's paramount position in the eastern Mediterranean. When Thutmose III died, his son Amenhotep II, 1425 to 1400 BCE, ruled a stable realm. Amenhotep II was less the conquering warrior than his father, but still organised a few minor campaigns. He favoured construction, diplomacy, trade agreements, and cultivating ties with Mitanni. Thutmose IV, 1400 to 1390 BCE, continued those policies and, according to one famous inscription known as the Dream Stele, legitimized his reign through a divine encounter with the Great Sphinx of Giza. Although he was Amenhotep II's rightful son, some suspect him of usurpation because the inscription implies a special destiny. Thutmose IV restored parts of the Sphinx and the Temples of Giza, ensuring the giant monuments continued reverence. Amenhotep III, 1386 to 1353 BCE, Thutmose IV's son, presided over one of the most splendid periods in Egyptian history. Political stability, vast wealth from tributes and trade, and a highly centralized government allowed him to sponsor an extraordinary wave of artistic and architectural achievements. Amenhotep III constructed palaces, expanded temples, raised countless statues, and adorned existing sacred sites throughout the kingdom. His reign also saw the rising wealth of the Amun priesthood, which had amassed huge landholdings and significant resources, rivaling even the crown. To counterbalance this, Amenhotep III promoted the cult of the Aten, a relatively minor manifestation of the sun. Although his efforts to limit Amun's power proved incomplete, they did lift the Aten from obscurity and set the stage for religious changes soon to come. Amenhotep IV, 1353 to 1336 BCE, later known as Akhenaten, is famous for turning the Aten cult into a virtual state religion. He closed other temples, particularly those devoted to Amun, and forbade the old worship of multiple gods. In his 5th regnal year, he moved the capital from Thebes to a new site at Akhenaten in modern-day Amarna. Here he inaugurated an artistic and cultural revolution that became known as the Amarna period, marked by more naturalistic art and open depictions of royal life. Nefertiti, his chief wife, played an important role in this new religious framework. She appears in many carvings alongside the king, and her famed bust, attributed to the sculptor Thutmose, remains one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egypt. Upon Akhenaten's death, the young Tutankhamun, 1336 to 1327 BCE, inherited a kingdom in turmoil. Barely 9 years old, he soon re-established the old gods and reopened the closed temples. He changed his name to Tutankhamun, a move that symbolized the country's return to the Amun cult and signaled the end of official monotheism. Tutankhamun shifted the administrative seat back north to Memphis, though Thebes retained ceremonial importance. He died around age 18, leaving no surviving children. His half-sister Akhenaten briefly appears in the political record, possibly attempting to secure her own power or appealing to foreign rulers to protect her. The Vizier Ai took the throne circa 1324 to 1320 BCE. Akhenaten then disappears from the record. After Ai's short reign, power passed to Horemheb, 1320 to 1295 BCE, a former general who systematically erased the legacy of the Amarna kings, removing Akhenaten's name and demolishing his temples. Horemheb returned to traditional religion, restored foreign alliances, rebuilt neglected temples, and reasserted Egyptian influence abroad, though the empire did not regain the full prestige it had enjoyed under Amenhotep III or Thutmose III. Horemheb also died childless, naming his vizier Paramessu as heir. This vizier rose as Ramesses I, 1295 to 1294 BCE, inaugurating the 19th dynasty. Ramesses I was already elderly and served as pharaoh briefly, allowing Seti I, 1294 to 1279 BCE, his son and designated successor, to handle much of the governance. Seti I undertook sweeping reforms, stabilized Egyptian territories abroad, and began restoring monuments that had been neglected. He continued the Grand Temple expansions at Karnak, begun many generations earlier, and reignited Egypt's stature. Yet it was his son Ramesses II, 1279 to 1213 BCE, destined to rule for 67 years, who truly redefined the era. Ramesses II, known as Ramesses the Great, built extensively, commissioning colossal statues of himself and grand temples. His name is inscribed almost everywhere, from Nubia in the south to sites in the north. Among his most famous monuments are the rock-cut temples of Abu Simbel, designed to celebrate his reign and overawe neighbouring peoples. Ramesses II is also known for the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, against the Hittite Empire, which had emerged as a regional rival. Ramesses II marched north with at least 4 divisions, around 20,000 men, to drive the Hittites back and potentially seize Kadesh. However, Hittite spies misled him into believing that the main Hittite force was far off. Ramesses II's first division advanced too rapidly and found itself cut off from the rest of the Egyptian army when Hittite chariots charged. Only the sudden arrival of Egyptian reinforcements saved the day. Though the campaign ended without a decisive capture of Kadesh, Ramesses II declared victory, proclaiming his heroic deeds on temple walls. The Hittite version of events, recorded in their archives, portrays the outcome differently, suggesting Muwatalli II retained the city. Nevertheless, both empires realized the futility of endless war. Eventually, Ramesses II concluded a peace treaty with the Hittites, among the first formal agreements of its kind in recorded history. It helped secure Egypt's northern borders, reduce military expenditures, and establish stable trade relations. When Ramesses II died, one of his younger sons, Meneptah, came to power, as most of Ramesses II's other children had predeceased their father. Meneptah, 1213 to 1203 BCE, combated invasions from Libya and repelled raiders commonly referred to as the Sea Peoples. His inscriptions, like the Meneptah stele, mention a people called Israel, marking the earliest known Egyptian reference to them. After Meneptah, the 20th dynasty saw rising challenges. Ramesses III, 1186 to 1155 BCE, is sometimes called the last great New Kingdom monarch. He imitated earlier warrior pharaohs, engaging in ferocious battles against waves of sea peoples who had ravaged parts of the eastern Mediterranean. While Ramesses III claimed significant victories, the conflicts drained Egypt's treasury. In the Deir el-Medina tomb builders village, labourers went unpaid, sparking the earliest recorded strike in history. The king faced internal strife as well, culminating in a fatal conspiracy orchestrated by a minor wife. His successors, Ramesses IV, Ramesses V, and Ramesses VI, tried to maintain the empire but lacked resources. Ramesses VII, Ramesses VIII, Ramesses IX, Ramesses X, and Ramesses XI presided over a steady unravelling of the state. Throughout these later reigns, the high priests of Amun in Thebes acquired massive wealth and administrative power, chipping away at royal authority. By the end of the New Kingdom, the unity achieved by Ahmose I had eroded. Rivalries between the monarchy and the priesthood escalated, and external threats went largely unchecked. When the last Ramesside pharaoh, Ramesses XI, died without reversing Egypt's decline, the country slipped into a new era of fragmentation. Priests of Amun and local rulers vied for dominance, initiating what modern scholars call the Third Intermediate Period. Thus, the New Kingdom's nearly 5 centuries saw some of Egypt's most celebrated accomplishments: sweeping military conquests, extraordinary works of art and architecture, far-reaching trade networks, and the transformative Amarna revolution. Yet it also ended with internal weakness and the slow dissolution of centralized power, setting the stage for a long interval of changed governance and foreign influence. Despite its final decline, the New Kingdom remains an iconic epoch of Egyptian civilization, defined by legendary names like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ramesses II. Smenders, 1077 to 1051 BCE, became ruler of Lower Egypt after burying Ramesses XI, thereby claiming the right to reign. He moved the capital from Per-Ramesses to Tanis, yet by that time Theban priests held significant power in Upper Egypt. Despite this division, no major civil war erupted. Smenders exercised authority mainly in the Delta, while High Priest Herihor, 1080 to 1074 BCE, controlled Thebes. In practice, Egypt was split. Local governors gained influence, and neither Tanis nor Thebes dominated the entire country. Later, the Libyan-led 22nd dynasty emerged under Shoshenq I, 943 to 922 BCE. After uniting Egypt, he launched military campaigns reminiscent of New Kingdom conquests. He restructured the Tanis administration and ended hereditary clerical appointments at Thebes, instead installing high priests and gods' wives of Amun by royal decree. This restored Egypt's economy, but after Sargon II's reign, circa 872 BCE, the land again fractured into smaller kingdoms based in Herakleopolis, Tanis, Memphis, and other cities. Far to the south, the Kushite king Kashta, circa 750 BCE, admired Egyptian culture so much that he Egyptianized his capital at Napata. His son Piye, 747 to 721 BCE, then marched north, conquering both Upper and Lower Egypt, though he later allowed Delta rulers to remain in place. These divisions weakened Egypt's defences, reducing earlier buffer zones with neighbouring regions. Shoshenq I's earlier gains had placed Egyptian borders against the Assyrians, leaving little room to manoeuvre. By the time of the 26th dynasty, Psamtik I revived the glory of the past through ambitious construction, military reforms, and better governance. His son Necho II, 610 to 595 BCE, continued these policies, hiring Greek mercenaries to improve Egypt's sea power, which was never a traditional Egyptian strength. Ramesses II further reformed government spending, stimulated the economy, and led campaigns that revitalized Egypt, leading to renewed prosperity and secure borders. Ramesses II's successor, Psamtik III, faced a grave challenge. Persian king Cambyses II requested an Egyptian bride, but Ramesses, wanting to evade direct compliance, sent the daughter of a former king instead. Feeling dishonoured when she revealed her true identity, Cambyses II vowed vengeance. This diplomatic rift set the stage for the next chapter of Egypt's history, as Persian forces advanced to claim the land once ruled by pharaohs and priests alike. Darius ascended the Achaemenid throne in 522 BCE, inheriting Cambyses II's realm and a fractious Egypt. Unlike his predecessor, Darius wanted to rule Egypt effectively, even in his absence. He visited the country multiple times and funded the rebuilding of damaged temples, dedicating new shrines in honor of the Egyptian gods. Following Persian policy, he was tolerant of local faiths, a stance that earned him greater goodwill than Cambyses II had achieved. Yet, under Xerxes I, 486 to 465 BCE, Persian energies shifted toward the second invasion of Greece. After defeats at Salamis and Plataea, Xerxes I focused more on building projects and life at court, leaving affairs in Egypt largely unaddressed. Artaxerxes I, 465 to 424 BCE, succeeded Xerxes I and confronted Egypt's first major revolt, led by Inaros II, reportedly descended from Psamtik V, and aided by Athens, 460 to 454 BCE. Although the Persians eventually suppressed the uprising, it highlighted enduring Egyptian resistance to foreign control. Persia, however, did not entirely smother Egypt's traditions. Egyptian religion, art, and governance survived, and local rulers briefly reclaimed power. The 30th dynasty resurrected a vestige of pharaonic glory, building monuments and temples as their forebears had done, until the Persians once again seized control. As the 4th century BCE advanced, Philip II of Macedon, 359 to 336 BCE, united the Greek city-states under his rule and prepared an invasion of Persia. When he was assassinated, his son Alexander took command of the Macedonian forces. Meanwhile, the final native Egyptian kings of the 30th dynasty fought to defend their land and perpetuate the ancient royal legacy, leaving behind grand structures reminiscent of earlier pharaohs. Even though many consider this late period the end of Egyptian sovereignty, it was far from the end of Egypt's civilization. The Nile remained vital, revered by its people. Seasonal feasts and customs continued, merging the new with the old. Their cuisine still reflected ancient staples, and Coptic, an evolved form of the ancient language, survives today in liturgical settings and amid regional dialects. Modern Egyptians proudly safeguard this heritage. They hold elaborate ceremonies, such as the procession of royal mummies in Cairo, and they restore sites like the Avenue of the Sphinxes in Luxor. Construction of new cities and highways expands commerce, while archaeologists keep unearthing artifacts that draw the world's attention, much as the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb did a century ago. Through its timeless magic and rich history, Egypt continues to fascinate and inspire people everywhere, standing as a remarkable link between the ancient past and the modern age.